So I do want to say thank you for coming, and I want to thank you. So Diane is a Stow resident, a good friend of mine. Her husband's here, some of our other good friends and neighbors, and this is her dad. So he's generously donating his time. He doesn't even live in the town. He's giving time out there, so we appreciate that.
So Gigi introduced me. I'm Diane Statkus, a 33-year resident of Stow, formerly of Wayland, where my father's from. I love to travel, especially with this guy. And I've been to 3 different Asian countries with him, so it's been really fun. In 2018, my then 80-year-old, who's 89 in next month, was going to Vietnam, and none of his friends could go with him. So I eagerly raised my hand and said, I will happily come with you. And because it was a tour of some of the Vietnam military sites. And having been a teen, because I'm a few years younger than my father, during the height of the war, it was going to be a full learning experience for me. I didn't have any memories, really, of the war at all. And my father will tell you what the trip meant to him in a few minutes. There were 3 travelers from the States, just 3 of us, and 3 tour guides. So it was supposed to be a much more crowded tour, but it didn't work out that well. So we had full attention of 3 fabulous tour guides. And so we'll continue on with the photos as soon as my dad gives his intro and a little bit about the history just to set the stage. Now your turn.
My turn, okay. As the esteemed philosopher Robin Williams said, good afternoon, Vietnam. You remember that? Nothing really funny about a war, but this one ended 50 years ago. And the Vietnamese people hold no grudges at all to the Americans, which is astounding. The more people we talked to, we would think that they were unhappy and they had lost a lot of relatives to the war, and it was astounding to me that they have a philosophy. I think it's a philosophy that they don't look back; they look forward. So they don't have grudges at all, and they love Americans. Everybody we saw over there was phenomenal. They just love us, with a few exceptions, and that is. And I always thought that maybe we might not survive a couple of instances, and that is some guys on motorbikes waiting for the light to change, and we're crossing the street, and these motorbikes would come at us, and if we if we stop the pace, because they anticipate where you're going to be when they get to you, and if you stop or you go ahead, they're going to hit you. So we're told to just walk steady all the way, and then they'll get around you because they anticipate that. So we survived that aspect of it, and just briefly, hopefully briefly, because I don't want to steal any time from my lovely daughter here. The trip was arranged by Lieutenant Colonel Brian DeToy, who is a terrific military expert. He's a PhD. He's taught at the Military Academy, and he has a company called Essential History Expeditions. And I've been with him to Cuba and Gettysburg, and more recently to Pearl Harbor for the 80th reunion. And when this trip came up, and he told me about it, and we communicate quite often on the internet, my wife said she didn't want to go, and I said, I wonder who might want to go with me, and guess who raised her hand? And I thought that was terrific because she wants to just get exposed to different locations. And I thought that was part of the issue. The other part of the issue was, I'm sure she wanted to make sure she watched carefully when I went to the airport in case I didn't get on the right plane and ended up in Brazil or someplace. And I was not a veteran of Vietnam. I served in Korea in 1989, 58 and 59, and discharged a few years before Vietnam started. So I have no combat experience. but hold those that did, such as Tom, in the highest possible esteem. I was a hawk during the Vietnam War, and I think the reason for that is that I was 5 years old when World War II started. And so from 5 years old at 1941 to 1945 is really an impressionable time for a young man or anybody to grow up. And I came to have my country in the highest possible regard. The greatest generation was just an unbelievable group of people. And I believe the government was always truthful and always was on the right side of everything. I think we've seen that may have been a little naive based on current situations. I stubbornly resisted the rationale of the anti-war protesters and considered all draft dodgers as traitors. But hindsight and this trip to Vietnam changed all that. It was a huge awakening for me, albeit a little bit late. Before Diane shows the photos, I want to take a few minutes to run through the significant aspects of the Vietnam War. 13 years in the making. And we'll go to some of the details of the battle sites that we visited until Diane brings them up on the screen, but they will be brief. We're hardly experts on what transpired. I have a trivia question that I'd like to pose, and that is, do you have any idea or can give me the number of presidents of the United States that had a direct involvement in Vietnam? I just want a number. How many presidents of the United States were directly involved in Vietnam?
6. 9.
Well, keep thinking about that, and I will tell you that because this is Council on Aging,
Yeah.
I have, for those that come up with the right answer, I've got a thing of prune juice here. So, but I haven't heard the right answer yet. The answer is 6. Did you say 6? You don't want the prune juice? Did you say 11? You said 6? Started with Harry Truman in 1950. He sent, I think, $10 million and some advisors to the French as they were fighting the Viet Minh. Viet Minh is a precursor to the Viet Cong. And the Viet Minh were communists, where the Viet Cong, by ideology, were not necessarily communists. Some were, but some were not. And the majority of the Viet Cong were just desiring to get all of the foreign people the hell out of the country. That was their main impetus. That's really what they were focusing on. So we went from Truman in 1950 to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower, which I'll get to in a minute, because I want to talk about the defeat of the French in Dien Bien Phu, which is up in the north. And everybody's heard these names. This is up Dien Bien Phu. The French were defeated.
Sorry, keeping you on your toes.
Okay, thanks. By this group of Viet Minh folks, and that led to the Geneva Convention, which forced all the French out of Vietnam, and they'd been there since 1887, because they colonialized most of Indochina. And the Geneva Convention not only forced the French out, but it divided Vietnam into the north and south at the 17th parallel. And that began the separation of what we know today. Ngo Diem was appointed Prime Minister of the South. Over the next few years, Diem became more and more like a dictator, fueling opposition to the communist insurgency. In 1960, Eisenhower, as he was leaving office, told Kennedy about the domino effect. And the theory is, and we all know what the domino effect is, that if we let Vietnam go communist, then it would be a domino effect that would affect Burma, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, and as we all know, that was, I think, the impetus behind all of the activities from Kennedy and Johnson, and then Johnson began to change his philosophy as time went on. But the domino effect was a key ingredient of the building up of the forces in our country, in Vietnam. In 1961, Charles de Gaulle, and I quote, told Kennedy, "I predict that you will step by step be sucked into a military and political quagmire." It's in 61. So the handwriting was on the wall from a guy that really knows, because the French were there since the 1800s. January 63 was the Battle of Apbec, which we'll get to. In June 63, the Buddhist priest Quoc Duc set himself on fire in downtown Saigon. In November of 63, Diem was overthrown by the military with the backing of Kennedy. He was murdered with his brother and continued to pledge the United States backing of Saigon, even though there was tremendous instability and corruption. In November of 63, Kennedy was assassinated, as we know. General Khan seized power in Saigon. 64, General Westmoreland assumes control of the MACV, which is Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. In August 64, the Gulf of Tonkin incident happened. And for those that don't know what that is, the USS Maddox, which was in the Gulf, which was international waters at the time, were attacked by 3 North Vietnamese patrol boats. All had what's the weapon that goes in the water?
Submarine?
Torpedoes.
Torpedoes, yeah.
Their torpedo capability, and it came very close to having a big issue. The couple of torpedoes were fired, but the captain of the boat, of the Maddox, was able to do enough of a maneuver so it missed. And at the end, only one bullet ever hit the Maddox. But what it did, it led to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was in August of 64 also, which gave Johnson unlimited ability to prosecute the war. They weren't going to have to say you have to go to Congress to continue. You've got the full right to do whatever you want. And so he took advantage of that. That resolution was revoked in 1971, but it gave Johnson the right to further the war as he did. In March of 65, he instituted Rolling Thunder, which was a 3-year operation of bombing the North. And it's the first time that we'd done anything north of the 17th parallel. And it ran for about 3 years, and it was intended to increase the South's morale, degrade the North's war-making capability, and persuade them to cease aggression. 643,000 tons of bombs were dropped during that 3-year period. That was also a period where John McCain was shot down in 1967. In June of 65, McNamara visited Vietnam, wanted to increase the troop levels by 50,000. At that time, there was about 500,000 U.S. troops in the country. And he began to have doubts about winning the war, which is another sad story about what happened in Vietnam. In 1968 was the Battle of Quai Son, which we'll talk about later. And in January of 1968 was the Tet Offensive, which is probably the most significant military activity of the North in the entire war.
About 3 minutes, Dad. It's almost 1:20.
I'm sorry?
About 3 minutes left.
3 more minutes I've
Yep.
got? The Tet Offensive is shown in red here. There were 14 different locations where the North decided that they were going to surprise the South and the Americans on Tet, which is the Vietnamese holiday, the New Year's holiday. So they had made a vow in 6 months before this happened to set these all up. And they did it by infiltrating at each of these sites the troops that were ready to open fire on Tet. And it was a huge operation. How many more minutes have I got? 2. They figured that the ARVN troops, which are the Republic of Vietnam South troops, would be on vacation because it was a holiday, and they would be very successful in conquering all of the South. It would make the South draw up a decision to basically just give in to the North, and it outraged the folks back at home. It was not a great victory for the North because we were able to counter the activities, but the political effect was absolutely devastating. There were 84,000 North Vietnamese VC troops at fortified positions at night. They came into the cover of darkness, so nobody knew they were there. So, and that's the way that the VC troops in the North Vietnam worked. Basically, the VC troops went into tunnels after the wars and came out of the tunnels and then occupied various buildings to surprise the enemy. It was a type of war that the United States had never faced before and didn't even know how to react. So am I running out of time here?
Oh, yeah, you're done.
I'm done.
You would have been a good history teacher. Yep. Yep.
All right, well,
You'll hit on some of that.
all right, well, let me mention just a couple of other things.
Okay.
In March of '68, because of the Tet Offensive, basically, LBJ announced his decision not to run again. And so it was going to be between Nixon and his vice president, Herbert Humphrey. At that time, in March of '68, Robert McNamara resigned as Secretary of Defense. At the time, American troop levels reached 500,000. It was replaced by Clark Gifford. LBJ, and this is something that's really, I don't think a lot of people know it, LBJ informed the North that he would halt the bombing if the talks could resume at the Paris peace conference, and they agreed just prior to this all-sides meeting in Paris. Nixon, realizing that a successful conference to end the war by the Democrats would favor Democrats in the upcoming election. So he contacted, through a surrogate, President Thieu, who was the South Vietnam president, and persuaded him to boycott the negotiation, justifying the request by telling Thieu that if he was elected in December, he would be much tougher on the North than Humphrey would ever be. It worked, and the failure of the conference caused the American electorate to switch its preference from the Democrats and Humphrey to the Republicans and Nixon. It was really an act of treason on Nixon's part, and LBJ knew it because he had bugged Thieu's office in South Vietnam and knew this conversation had taken place. And Nixon, when they talked, just denied it. He just said it didn't happen. But LBJ couldn't do anything about it because he couldn't reveal the fact that he'd bugged the office of Thieu, his name. So Nixon won the election by 1%, and he started to withdraw the fighting men over the South. He was beginning to reduce the fighting force, called Vietnamization. And then, just about through, Diane, he started another massive bombing of the North, different name, but he called it, I think, bombing them into submission. And in a brazen, malevolent irony, he talked to the co-team government and said he would stop the bombing, just as LBJ had said, if all sides could meet at the negotiate peace war at another Paris Peace Conference. They agreed. And the peace conference in January of '73 finally declared the war was over for the Americans, but fighting continued for another 2 years with the South as the sole military force. President Ford had to intervene on a couple of occasions, but the South eventually fell to the North, as we know. So, Diane, you are on.
Okay. Dad mentioned real quick who our tour guide was. The lead was Dr. Brian DeToy. So just a couple bullets. He was a PhD in American history, 28 years as a lieutenant colonel. Not as a lieutenant colonel, but he ended as a lieutenant colonel, but 28 years in the U.S. Army with multiple deployments, including Iraq, 14-year military and history professor at West Point and University of Kansas, featured on many channels, History, A&E, PBS, Discovery, and History Channel. He was an unbelievable tour guide and very, very passionate. And today's his birthday. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, is that right?
It is.
I didn't know that.
The one woman on the left is Judith. She was our one other person that came with us, and our tour guide locally was New, who Dad and I just saw last summer in New Hampshire. So she married an American that she gave a tour to, and she came over. So that was quite fun, and we enjoy seeing her. This is Saigon today, also known as Ho Chi Minh City now, that was renamed in 1975. Very congested, as you can tell. Look at all the bikes. This was a view from my hotel room. The electricity, I don't think, has gotten much better, probably, since back then, so that was pretty overwhelming to see. Laundry hanging out in the dirty air, but that probably hasn't changed much either. Local bikes everywhere. As Dad said, you don't want to walk slowly. You go as though they don't see you, and they won't play chicken and egg with you. Propaganda, it's still a communist country, so there would be restaurants, propaganda stores, everywhere that you looked. This is a view from the Continental Hotel, where daily correspondence briefings happened during the French colonialization of Vietnam. The view was from the rooftop bar where journalists like Peter Jennings hung out while reporting on the Vietnam War. You might remember this view. This was the view of the American embassy workers in 1975 climbing into the last helicopter to leave Vietnam. It included desperate workers and South Vietnamese who had helped and worked for the Americans who wanted to leave. So it was very overwhelming for them, and many of them didn't make it on. View of the same building today. Now we'll go south. Our first day was spent in the Mekong Delta. I'll go through these photos quickly. at the same time tell you the story about them. So this is it today. It has an intricate network of rivers and canals. It became a crucial strategic area for both the Viet Cong, VC, and Allied forces. The U.S. Navy established significant river operations to control the waterways, disrupt VC supply lines, and support ground operations. The region was also a hotbed of conflict and suffering, marked by heavy civilian casualties, intense fighting, and significant use of tactics like Agent Orange. Today, it is the 5th most polluted river in the world, full of plastics, disease. However, it's still used for fishing, boating, and washing clothes. It's a very heavily river for commerce as well. So lots of people live on the river. A view of what is sold on that ship. So bananas are sold on that ship, and people are out on the market looking for food. You can see somebody in here fishing in the water. Again, propaganda sold in some of the side stores along the way. And there you go. Now you're out to Outback. 5 minutes, Papa. Or less.
Or less, right.
I'm looking at the clock.
Outback was one of the earliest battles in which the American advisors were involved in. And they were, the South and the advisors were ordered to destroy a VC transmitter at the hamlet. The South thought that the VC had 120 men to guard the hamlet, but actually was 3 times that many. And they were all well camouflaged. The VC fought valiantly, shot down 3 helicopters, showered the ARVN vehicles with grenades. The South retreated, and the VC withdrew under the cover of darkness. They left 18 dead, and the ARVN death toll was 80. The U.S. had 3 fatalities. The lesson learned in this, which was, I say, one of the first eye-opening battles of the war, was the ineffectiveness of the South, despite superior numbers, poor leadership, corruption, low morale, losing faith in the DM government, and the decision was that the American troops are going to be needed, and it was the beginning of bringing the American troops into the battle. It was a huge boost to the VC morale, and proof that they could beat an army with more troops and superior weapons.
Ready?
Ready.
Okay. This was a tough one. This was the War Remnants Museum. The exhibit was not for the faint of heart. Most of us left in tears. It's not the first of its kind for the North Vietnamese. The museum followed a tradition of such exhibits exposing war crimes. First those of the French, and then those of the Americans. The museum contains a series of themed rooms in several buildings. The period material, equipment placed within a walled yard. The equipment include a UH-1 Huey helicopter, an F-5A fighter, a Blue 82 Daisy Cutter bomb, M48 Patton tank, and an A-1 Strike Raider attack bomber, and a A-37 Dragonfly attack bombers. Those don't roll easily off my tongue. There were a number of unexploded ordnances stored in the corner of the yard with their chargers and fuses removed. Some of these planes were actually Vietnam planes that they changed and wrote U.S. Air Force on, or other U.S. Military names. So this was what some of the rooms started to look like as Brian was going through everything with us. Then we entered what was known as a building that contained tiger cages. Anybody know what those were? Tiger cages? Dad will talk a little bit about those, but they held political prisoners, in some cases 4 to 5 years, in these little teeny cages. Other exhibits showed graphic photography covering the effects of Agent Orange and other chemical defoliant sprays and the use of napalm and phosphorus bombs, and highlighted war atrocities such as My Lai massacre, which was a U.S. war crime committed in 1968 involving the mass murder of unarmed civilians in a South Vietnamese province. That is not depicted in the museum. what is not depicted in the museum is the equally horrific crimes committed by the Viet Cong against the South Vietnamese and allies during the war. Guillotine, tiger cage. People were exposed, lived outside of these for months or years at a time. Propaganda, some of the presidents, just terrible to think of them laughing. But this is what was represented at the time. Some of the equipment used, Agent Orange, flags, impact of, education for young students, and some of the ordnance bombs that you would see. Okay, Dad.
The emulation of 73-year-old Quang Duc brought the world's attention to the war. He is the Buddhist monk that set himself on fire in downtown Saigon. He was not the only Buddhist monk to die that way, but was the most publicized because he had a serene look on his face during the hottest part of the fire. Diem persecuted the Buddhists and promoted Catholicism, even preventing Buddhist flags to be displayed on holidays while having Catholic symbols displayed in all public buildings. When Mrs. Diem commented publicly that she would bring matches to the next barbecue, Kennedy was incensed and backed a coup to overthrow Diem.
These are quick photos of two of the major Air Force bases. This one was Tan Son Nhut. You can see some of the outbuildings in the background from Vietnam that are still there. This was a central U.S. Air Force facility and a major command control center in South Vietnam during the war. It served as a vital hub for military operations and later in the site of attacks during the Tet Offensive and final bombings before the fall of Saigon. It was among the busiest airports, air bases in the world from 68 to 74, and also served as a key base for the NVA. Some of the outbuildings, as I mentioned, still remain, and they are leaving them on purpose. Pleiku Air Force Base was another one. It was strategically crucial. The U.S. military facility in the Vietnam Central Highlands, acting as a key supply and logistics hub for operations extending west to Cambodia. Its location in the mountainous Central Highlands made a strategic base for operations into rugged border areas. Now kids and families use the strip for commuting to school and play. Outbuildings remain here too. We traveled here in order to begin our long bus trek to the landing zone. Okay, Dad.
It's called the iTrag Drag Campaign Landing Zone X-ray, and it was a day-long hike in a van that went on seemed to be forever.
I think it was about 8 hours.
And when we finally got there, we learned from two soldiers that were South Vietnamese soldiers that we had 10 minutes. We couldn't stay any longer because it's considered sacred ground, and also the fact that it's right on the Cambodian border meant that there was a problem with people being on that site by the Cambodians. And I don't know what the issue was, but they said you can't stay here. You've got 10 minutes. The battle was brutal. The North Vietnam had days and days and days to go into the mountains and prepare for the attack, which they knew was going to come. And Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore was the commander, and he was featured on the Mel Gibson.
We are soldiers.
We were soldiers, and it's about that battle. And if you see the tape, you get an idea of just how brutal this was, because the North just kept putting people out, and we would mow them down, and they kept coming, and they would mow them down. And it lasted for 3 days, and the U.S. troops were vastly outnumbered. But the NVA troops proved tenacious, ultimately succumbed to the artillery and air support and the firepower of the Americans. The U.S. had 79 deaths. The enemy had 634 deaths, but probably much more. And I told you we had 10 minutes to stay there before we had to leave. The biggest lesson learned in this by the North Vietnamese is that if they were stationed back a few hundred yards from where our lines were, then our air power could come in and drop napalm, bomb them, strafe them. And they decided if we did hand-to-hand combat and brought our troops right up to the other troops, the American troops, that our air support would be meaningless because we were not going to bomb ourselves. So that was one of the features that came out of the landing zone X-ray battle, is that they wanted to now, in future battles with the U.S., be as close as possible in hand-to-hand combat so that our air power was going to be useless. Okay.
Okay. Our next trip, our tiny group of 6 had the remarkable experience of meeting Lele Hayslip and to be invited into her ancestral home in the mid-central highlands. Many villages in this area of the country were caught between two sides of the war. They were threatened by the Viet Cong and the South Vietnamese soldiers to be loyal to their side or risk death. They didn't know who was on what side. This resulted in distrust of neighbors and even family members. Lele wrote this book here in 1989, which Oliver Stone then turned into a movie called Heaven and Earth. On the back, it reads, Lele was just 12 years old when the U.S. helicopters landed in her tiny village of central Vietnam. As the government and Viet Cong troops ravaged the area, both sides recruited children as spies and saboteurs. Lele was one of those children. Before the age of 16, she had suffered the near starvation, imprisonment, and deaths of beloved family members, but miraculously found the strength to keep going and ultimately fleeing to the U.S. Almost 20 years after her escape, she returned to the devastated country and loved ones she'd left behind. Scenes of the joyous reunion are interwoven with the brutal war years, creating an extraordinary portrait of the woman who held fast to her faith in humanity. This book I purchased for the COA, so you'll find it in the library here if you want to take it out. In these pictures, you can see Lele in the front row with her 90-year-old sister at that time and her mid-80s-year-old brother in the back. She was not allowed into the country after she wrote this book for several years. And she has since created an organization for helping children in Vietnam. It's raised millions and millions of dollars. She's very loyal to Vietnam. This was the shrine of her dead aunt that they fill every day with foods to feed, and to her brother, who was recruited by the Viet Cong, left, and was never seen again. So it was a very emotional time, a very emotional visit. Okay, Dad.
The little guy in that picture is about 4'10". Diane seems to think it was because of his imprisonment. I'm not sure that
In the tiger cage.
In the tiger
for
cage.
7 years.
The tiger cages were probably that high, just long enough to fit a person in, on the concrete floor, and they were in there as many as 23 hours a day. They could hardly move. They had to tear parts of their clothing off for toilet paper. I mean, it was just an unbelievably bad situation. And these tiger cages were made up by the French and in South Vietnam. And they were used by the South, actually primarily for the South, just to keep political prisoners and combatants in the most inhumane conditions possible. And so this fella here, as you can see how small he is, was there for 5 years. And you talk to him and you think he would be angry and would be, as you say, have PTSD.
I asked the question if if he had PTSD, and Lele answered. I have a stepmother called, my mother-in-law called Lele. Her name is Lele. Lele answered the question about PTSD, and she said, that's an American thing. We just forward. They had nothing, they had to. So that was interesting. And you asked the question, do you hold any bad feelings about the Americans? And that's where that really changed your attitude. He said none.
Yeah, their culture is that they don't look back. Everything is forward. And that's the way he was, and that's the way everybody we talked to that was involved in the war. There was no looking back.
Right.
Because it doesn't do any good to look back. You can only look for the future.
Right.
So he was an eye-opener for me, and you just can't imagine people having gone through this tiger cage. I'll just mention one other thing about the tiger cages. They were in the lower level. The upper level had gratings, and the guards could look down through the gratings to the people in the tiger cages. And if they didn't like what they saw, they would put powdered lime down on top of the people. One woman was blinded as a result of it. It was just unbelievably inhumane. And the way that they, I don't know if this is part of the story, but there were two congressmen that had been brought into the country to look into this situation, and the guy that ran the prison said, "No, there's nothing like that here. We don't have tiger cages. I don't know where you get that idea." And he happened to tap on a door that the prison guy said doesn't go anywhere. And there was a guard on the other side. When he heard the tapping, he opened the door, and you could see into the area where the tiger cages were, which was kind of an ironical situation. But that's an aside.
We have a book up here that you saw in one of the photos. So the things that are up here you can peruse through when we're done, if you're interested. So there were two forms of tiger cages. There were the ones on the box, on the ground, and then there were ones above ground where soldiers walked back and forth and dropped food in, and like Dad said, other things that could hurt them or stab them with poles or what have you. Anyone know what this is?
China Beach.
He's my husband. Are you a plant? China Beach, or Da Nang, as you know. That is on the East Vietnamese Sea. And this I took just to show you how dense the forest was. And this was from the Annamite range on the way to Hue. And you can't even see the 3 times the depth of the canopy. It was very, very rich. And it had come back, obviously, but that gives you an idea of how deep those forests were. And this is just a quick view on our way to Hue, which is H-U-E. You may not know that. And you can see that in relation to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which I'm sure you've all heard of, as well as the DMZ, which was the demilitarized zone. Okay, we are at Hue.
Hue was the dynasty location in the 1800s. There was a monarchy in Vietnam, and they had built beautiful palaces, and it was surrounded by a big fence, a big gate, and a moat. I mean, it was a typical British kind of development, and it was magnificent and it was beautiful. What happened was that, and I want to read this to you because I can't explain it otherwise. There was a battle of Way that's considered probably one of the turning points of the war, and it was written at that big fat book is just on the Battle of Way. That's how big it was, 570 pages of just this one battle. And I read it before we went, and I condensed it to 2 pages. So if you'll bear with me, I want to read this because I can't do justice to it otherwise. And this is really based on this guy Bowden's description. He said, the infiltration of Way by the North Vietnamese and the VC was a prime objective of the North Vietnamese Tet Offensive and undoubtedly one of the most successful. Although the North expected that the offensive would encourage an uprising of the local citizenry in favor of the communist cause, it didn't happen. But there was no arguing that the military aspects of the plan was initially a huge success. With the assistance and guidance of young ideological VC schoolgirls and others who were very familiar with the city, on January 31st, 68, in the middle of the night, 60 battalions, roughly 10,000 NVA and VC troops descended on the city and occupied the majority of its buildings. The American High Command, including General Westmoreland, had no idea that what had taken place that night or that Way was now completely in enemy hands. The general was in fact expecting an enemy incursion into the region at some point, but insisted that it would take place in the village of Khe Sanh, northwest of Way, and closer to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. When the decision came down that the Americans were to take the city of Way, Westmoreland believed and notified Washington as such that it would take only 2 or 3 days to occupy the city, and the troops would encounter very little resistance. No one in Vietnam at the time had any doubts that the Americans had vastly superior firepower from the air, ground, and sea. If our intelligence and command structure had any idea of what was in store for our troops as they prepared for the battle, heavy artillery from the ships offshore, ground-based bombs and above, could severely weaken the enemy's fighting capability. Since this didn't happen, our troops entered the fight not only with an unrealistic expectation that they would be facing, but with small arms and limited artillery from the rear. Mark Bowden, author of Black Hawk Down, wrote a very detailed book on the Battle of Way and described what has become the single bloodiest fight of the Vietnam War and the most intense urban battle in American history. On day 1, our troops began to enter the city. They were met with blistering barrage of enemy firepower, forcing the Americans to pull back in utter disbelief and declare to HQ that we were outnumbered and outgunned. The shocking development obviously called for a major shift in strategy, which fell to the local commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cheapen, who pulled the soldiers back to the triangle, which is across the river, which is at the bottom, into kind of an area where people congregated, while he devised a new plan for the battle, which was eerily reminiscent of World War II. He told the men that what is now painfully obvious, that it's not going to be a cakewalk that they had expected. It would require fighting the enemy house to house, building by building, block to block. Enemy fire came from everywhere as the Americans moved forward into the city. When a soldier was hit and lying in an exposed area, the brave troops, souls who went to pull him to safety, were subjected to withering fire from the front, the side, the rear, from rooftops, often with deadly results for the injured soldier and the rescuer. The battle lasted 24 days, with the Americans finally claiming victory, but the cost was steep. More than 10,000 civilian and military lives of both sides were lost, and the city was in ruins. Allied wounded exceeded 3,700, and the enemy wounded figures are not available. The Battle of Way was a turning point in the overall Vietnam War. It proved to many, including Walter Cronkite, who visited Way during the battle, that the war was unwinnable. When he returned home and relayed his doubts on air to the American people, many hawks became less vocal, and the anti-war movement got a shot in the arm. General Westmoreland was eventually recalled, and President Johnson announced he would not run for re-election in the fall. Although Nixon didn't see the handwriting on the wall and continued to prosecute the war, in the misguided belief that we could bomb Hanoi into submission, or the Dark Ages, I think he called it. Cronkite was right. We were not going to win. In 1975, President Ford finally succumbed to the inevitable in the image of desperate people trying to grab hold of the skids on the helicopter to take off on the roof of the embassy in Saigon speaks volumes. And he had delayed this, was declared in a speech in Tulane in 1975, the Vietnam War is finished as far as America is concerned. And the Battle of Hue was probably the precursor to the final chapter of the war itself. From the epilogue in the book, Bowden summed up the following: the loyalty, bravery, and patriotism of the American GI in the worst days of the fighting, facing near certain death or severe bodily injury, repeatedly advanced. The way their loyalty and idealism was exploited by leaders who themselves had lost faith in the war is a stunning betrayal. It is lasting American tragedy and a disgrace. So that was Way.
Dad, you don't remember, and you had done a reading there too. You just showed a photo of that.
That's the,
Yeah.
when I
You
read
just
this.
read? Oh, I
that.
said, okay, good. Okay. Now we're at Khe Sanh. And some of you might remember this picture. I think it was on the cover of Newsweek. Okay, Papa.
The battle was a protracted siege from January 21st to the April 8th. 1,000 U.S. Marines and ARVN soldiers defended a remote combat base against a much larger NVA troop count, said to be between 20 and 30 and 40,000 dug in the surrounding terrain. Where the troops, the American troops was in the middle, and then the Viet Cong and the North Vietnam surrounded this hill and were firing into the hill from all sides. They hit an ammunition dump and destroyed 90% of its ordnance, so we really had no way to fight back. And we were actually pinned down in trenches for weeks on end as the firepower kept coming from all sides around the top. What eventually stopped the fighting was, again, dropping tons and tons of bombs on the enemy. And they were called in by the Americans. And 100,000 tons of bombs were dropped all around the top of these. And it's amazing to be on top and see the results of the battle, because they left it pretty much as it was when they left. And it was a helicopter there. I think there was a tank. There were several military vehicles that were left right on where they had dropped, guns.
They brought some in too.
And then there was a museum that they'd set up, and the museum it really explained most of what happened. But it was a brutal fight, and it was only the Air Force and the bombs that ended it in our favor.
And a little cemetery up there. Okay. While driving through the mountainous areas of the Central Highlands, we passed minority tribal groups. There are about 87 tribes that make up about 15% of the population of Vietnam. They have unique cultures, languages, and traditions, as well as a lot of poverty. And so I just have a few photos. You can't see this person probably, but he's laying right on a bed. It was very hot. And then they're hiding under their house there just to keep cool. Okay. We have probably 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes. So I know it's 5 minutes of, but you're welcome to stay, and we'll keep going if people are here. Okay, Dad, these are the prisoners.
This was another eye-opening meeting that was set up by Lilay. There were three, I think there were
There
two.
were two men and a woman.
Two, yeah, and they were Viet Cong and had been prisoners of war. And we met with them, and there was a representative from the North Vietnamese government who listened carefully, and when they would say something that he didn't think was appropriate, they would, he'd yell, scream out them, and then they would have to go back and retrace what they were saying. But they could not have been more genuine, more friendly, less, affected by the prison and the war and their prison experiences. And we just had a great time with them. And Lele was the interpreter. Again, it just opened up the realization for me that, what I had originally thought about the Viet Cong, they really were not bad people. They would just wanted to get the American people the hell out of the country, which they wanted to do with the French before us.
And they were pawns, a lot of them. They just had to do it.
Yeah, what happened with all of the people involved in the Viet Cong was, as Diane has said before, was that the Viet Cong at the beginning of the war would go into a village and have everybody come into a meeting, and they would try to indoctrinate them into taking their side. But it also was the North did the same thing with these folks, and they had to decide what side they were going to be on.
Yeah.
But the Viet Cong primarily were in favor of getting the Americans and everybody the hell out of Vietnam. And these folks were just two of the folks that did it.
Okay. Eye-opening was right. Okay, these are very interesting photos. I'll go quickly through these. This was a place called Vinh Muc. It's a tunnel complex strategically located at the border of Vietnam and South Vietnam. The tunnels were built to shelter people from the intense bombing of the villages in Vinh Linh in the Vietnamese demilitarized zone. The American forces believed that the villagers of Vinh Muc were supplying food and armaments to the North Vietnamese garrison on the island of Con Co, which was in turn hindering the American bombers on their way to bomb Hanoi. The idea was to force the villagers of Vinh Muc to leave the area, but as a typical Vietnam, they had nowhere else to go. The villagers initially dug the tunnels to move the village 10 meters underground, but the American forces designed bombs that burrowed down 10 meters. Eventually, against the odds, the villagers moved the village to a depth of 30 meters. It was constructed in several stages beginning in 1966 and used until early 1972. The complex grew to include wells, kitchens, rooms for each family, and spaces for health care. About 60 families lived in the tunnels. As many as 17 children were born inside the tunnels. Some people didn't go outside and see sun for 2 years. The tunnels were a success and no villagers lost their lives. The direct hit was from a bomb. The only direct hit was from a bomb that failed to explode. And those were some of the craters you saw. The resulting hole was utilized as a ventilation shaft. 3 levels of tunnels were eventually built. So you can see where they've collapsed there. But others they preserved for you to walk through. Very slippery, very damp. And they've set up statues just so you could see. I'm like, Dad, don't fall. Somebody was holding his armpit there behind you so you wouldn't slip. Okay. Hanoi, a very busy city of Vietnam, West Lake, where John McCain's plane crashed in 1967 in Hanoi. He was held in the prison for 7 years. So this is Hanoi today. Eating on the streets, they probably did that back then as well. Little teeny stools, there's the lake, West Lake, where John McCain went in. Maison Centrale, this was the name of the prison when it was French operated. Now it was known as Hue La prison, known to the Americans as the Hanoi Hilton. The name Hue La refers to potter's kiln, but loosely translate to mean household or fiery furnace. Hue La's 20-foot walls topped with barbed wire and broken glass made escape nearly impossible. The filthy, infested prison compound contained several buildings, each given nicknames such as Heartbreak Hotel, New Guy Village, and Las Vegas by POWs. The cells represented the museum's exhibit. The cells represented in the museum's exhibit represent the Hanoi Hilton experience. Shackles. In 1951, when this prison was used for the French War, 16 death sentence prisoners escaped through this underground sewer that you see here. 5 of them succeeded and rejoined the resistance. John McCain and John McCain when he went back. The almond tree, that's what Dad's standing next to, George. Prisoners from 1930 to 1950 used almond bark and young leaves to cure dysentery and diarrhea and to clean wounds. They made pen holders, pipes, and flutes from branches. This tree became part of the history of the prison. Now the prison is one of the most visited somber museums in Hanoi. So in closing, it was an amazing trip. It took a long time to put this presentation together. I had over 600 photos, condensed it down as much as we could. And one of the things that for me was telling, and Dad highlighted this, a common question, have veterans chosen to go back or live in Vietnam? American veterans have returned to Vietnam after war, with tens of thousands of them returning since the 1990s for reasons including atonement, seeking closure, building relationships, or experiencing a connection with the Vietnamese people and culture. Some of these veterans have found love in Vietnam, chosen to live there to care for families or children they left behind. A lot of children were left behind by American Asians, I think they're called.
Yeah.
Or they went back to they prefer to live in that country and culture to the life of the U.S. Okay, Papa, you're closing. Closing.
I see that.
Anything to say in closing?
It says, thank you for coming today.
Yeah. That's it. Did you give out your prune juice?
I tried to, but nobody would take it.
All right, well, you can put it on the table. Somebody can sneak it away.
Okay. Nobody's going to admit taking it, though.
Well, So if anybody wants to look at anything that we've got up here, please, if you would like to take this book, just return it to the COA. Thank you for coming, you guys. Thank you. Any questions? Nope. Yeah.
About Hue, was what you showed restored, or did it not crumble in the battle?
I think some of it definitely did crumble, and I took those photos out where you could see, just some concrete. These buildings have been repaired.
Have been repaired.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Mike.
Regarding the tiger cages, obviously it was a horrific situation for anybody who was held captive like that. But were the tiger cages successful in extracting useful information from any of the prisoners, or was it just to
Torture
people?
I think it was torture, but it never came up as an issue, so I don't know the answer to that. But it's a good question. I'm sure
Could have been used for both.
Right.
Tom, anything to add?
I'm just curious, the areas that were defoliated with Agent Orange, it looks like the vegetation has come back.
I think it has come back.
Is there still a lot of pollution in the ground and in the water?
Probably. There's still a lot of children and adults that have impact. And there was a whole part of the Remnants Museum that you walked through that was horrific in terms of photos from then and now. And as a matter of fact, when you left the museum, they had 2 humans, whether they were children or adults, that had Agent Orange, and they were collecting money. So there's still an impact to babies, so it's probably in the water, foliage can come back, but yeah, it's still there.
Just a comment for everybody. I was located up by, just south of Hue. That's where Camp Eagle was located. It was a big 101st Airborne camp. And all I saw was jungle.
Jungle?
Triple canopy jungle.
Yes.
Jungle and more jungle.
Yep.
And, people ask me, well, did you ever see any bad guys to shoot at? Never saw one. You don't see them.
They knew how to hide.
Well, not only that, I mean, you may be taking fire from someplace, so you just blanket that area with fire, but never saw any.
Wow. Wow. And for people who don't know Tom, probably everybody does here, he has a whole profile in this month's Senior Scoop. So thank you, Tom. Thank you. All right.
I don't know if anybody knows Barbie Wolfenden. She's a professional writer, so she did a great job of writing.
Yeah, she sure did. It was a great article. It wasn't intimidating to read that, and I said to my dad, he's probably going to come, So, yeah, Mike.
Just for a question for both of you, given everything that you saw, what was like the most beautiful thing or, that you saw nature-wise or artifact-wise? Or...
I would say the landscaping area, the stuff has grown back, and it's really a beautiful country. We went up to the Long Bay.
Halong Bay? Halong Bay.
Halong Bay on a cruise ship, and the landscape from the boat with these mountains coming out of the water was so magnificent.
Yeah.
But I would say just.
This is Halong Bay. Just,
I would
yeah,
just
they're
like
like,
to say the landscaping more than anything else.
yeah,
The-
yeah, and then the landscaping, yeah.
And which city was the most beautiful?
That's a good question. I don't think we could answer that. Awful lot of it.
Hoi An. Hoi An was probably the most beautiful. So we integrated some non-military sites, and Hoi An was one of them. Very pretty. But again, we wanted to keep this presentation focused on the military stuff. So again, feel free to get up and move. We're at time, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.